Thanks very much for dodging the lunch queue and coming here to the session. So my name is Gluhak. I work for an organization called the Digital Catapult. We are like a non-for-profit organization which has been set up by the UK government, an innovation technology center. And our goal is really to drive the adoption of advanced digital technologies. Examples of them are IoT, and LPWAN is certainly part of that, but also like 5G, IoT, AI, and immersive technologies. And all of those could make a difference to the economy. And we often work with smaller businesses, like innovators, who kind of want to kind of start experimenting early with technologies that become available, and then obviously bring products and services to market. And then we also work with the demand side and try to set up the right kind of use cases and business cases to move this forward. And in my talk today, I will really talk about the area of cities, where I've been also active in the recent year, and share some of my learnings in this space. So obviously, with every kind of advanced technology, you go a certain cycle along, which is basically something that you may have been familiar with. So at the beginning, you've got like a community of early adopters, and you can see many here, and actually you're part of it. And you believe that this is a technology that can change the world, that it can make a difference to how current business work and operates. But the solutions that you have, they are still not as mature. Maybe they can still struggle with some problems. The business cases aren't defined. And obviously, what you try to make is this jump from an early market to a mainstream market. And I mean, looking at the Things Conference last year and this year, I can see we are slowly going up this sort of cycle, and I'm quite confident that we will actually manage to kind of cross the chasm and bridge the chasm. In the UK, we haven't been as fortunate as some of you guys here in mainland Europe. So you're pretty much spoiled in terms of network coverage. So I've seen a presentation by KPN. You've got a whole network covered with LoRaWAN. You've got NB-IoT here, and so on. And quite a few of these countries actually, these rollouts have started 2 or 3 years ago. And when we looked at this sort of situation in the UK, we did not have any national LoRaWAN network. And at that time, Sigfox was around. They started to deploy a few base stations in some cities, but they never really managed to reach a national rollout. And so in this kind of vacuum, we tried to kind of create opportunities for entrepreneurs. And we thought, okay, if we kind of make LPWAN networks available to communities to experiment with and to innovators, and provide the right innovation support and the right business challenges, hopefully we can also stimulate quite a few UK products and services. And if you look around in the hall today, you can see quite a few businesses, companies from around the world having LPWAN solutions, which are mature. But I also slowly see a few UK kind of companies emerge as well with solutions, and hopefully we'll see more of them in future. So what we did is we started off in London to deploy a LoRaWAN network, free to use for innovators. This was 3 years ago. And then we slowly increased this coverage across the UK, including Northern Ireland, Northeast, and also we've started to work together with a re-emerging Sigfox operator in the UK, WND, to open up the network and make this infrastructure available for experimentation. And that has kind of grown. We've kind of supported 100 businesses now with smaller proof of concepts and experimentation. And in the end, basically, we've kind of really had a coverage of 150 gateways in the UK alone. And at the same time, also the Things Network community kind of emerged, 300 gateways. And we thought, okay, before we kind of have separate communities and separate innovation networks, let us bring them all together. And we've kind of joined up. We're now running a public UK cluster for the Things Network in partnership with the TTN. And we've moved basically all this kind of networks together to have one common coverage. Obviously, with these kind of networks in place, we've got also cities coming to us and starting to understand how can this technology make a difference for me. And obviously, the concept of smart cities has been around for many years. So you can imagine the big smart city visions that has been dreamed up, these greenfield cities re-emerging from the desert sand. And in reality, although this is good sales material, within the last 10 years, not much of this could be sufficiently realized. And obviously, you've got the big vendors. They come in with this corporate kind of vision of what they say, the smart city as a control room, like the smart mayor with all the dashboards. I know how my city works. the IoT infrastructure feeding all this information. Now I can put this switch and everything is going to be fine, but reality is a bit different. And I know it's a challenging slide, but these are all the sort of challenges that I've come across in the last 10 years of why actually IoT is not really delivering value yet in cities. On one side, it's basically around, obviously, that it's a lot of technology push going on. And often, technology is rolled out just for the wrong purpose and without a real understanding of the problem that there is, not co-created maybe with the city and the citizens that actually will use this technology. Then also, you've got a lot of issues with making this infrastructure available because currently, or until now, the deployment costs were pretty high. And LoRaWAN obviously makes a difference now. Now you can much more simpler roll out citywide connectivity and also deploy sensors. But it's been proven a barrier in the past. Also, the procurement process in cities is quite difficult. So it takes startups sometimes up to a year or 2 years to close a deal with a city. And by the time they actually have a deal, their cash is run out. And it's one of these challenges as well that you kind of have in this kind of city space. Things around as well on lack of clear standards. So you've got this problem of cities not trusting vendors because once they buy a solution, they are locked in with it and they can't really move away with it. Also things about the technology maturity itself, and also a problem for the developers themselves in the cities when they build, let's say, an application or a service for a city, and they want to kind of then start selling to another city, they often have to start from scratch because the environments are different in the cities, the APIs are different, the data owners are different, and it takes nearly as much time to basically launch a new service in a city as the one that you previously developed for another. And these are the sort of barriers that we see and feel. And in the light of this, we've really kind of experimented in the last year and looked at 3, let's say, components that really make a difference in how IoT and LPWAN technologies can be introduced in cities. So on one side, we really look at open IoT connectivity. So how can we make it simpler and easier to kind of connect infrastructure in a city? And LoRaWAN certainly plays a big role, and the Things Network as well. Then around challenge-led co-creation. So really, instead of just companies trying to kind of develop solutions that they may think solve problems cities have, why don't we bring the problems from the cities, work them out really together as well with some citizens involved, and then let companies address those challenges. And in the third one as well is, how can we really look at scaling what we've built as a pilot to other cities? And you can only do that if you kind of create environments across cities that are common, that make it easier for one solution provider to basically deploy in another city. And this is something that we explore as part of a project called Synchronicity. Looking at some of these elements, so the first one really around how we kind of engage cities now around networks and creating real solutions and pilots, is we run what we call a program, an innovation support program for councils, where we kind of ask them to come forward with their challenges. We kind of formulate them in a way that actually entrepreneurs can understand it and address it. And then we do an open call to kind of select a set of companies who actually have the ability to address the solution with some technology base that they've developed in the past. And then we kind of take them through a little journey where they learn and discover more about the challenges and are able to phrase their solution with respect to the problem. There's kind of a pitching event at the end where they're able to then kind of select a winner, which then in the end gets a pilot together with the city. And this sort of program we've kind of run now in the UK with 5 different councils. So Croydon, Suffolk, Sutton, Thurrock, and Watford. So some London-based councils and some others outside London. And there were very interesting use cases that are kind of starting to being addressed. The first one is really an example around Watford. So here, Watford has had a challenge of urban redevelopment. So the whole taxi ranks had to be moved. Also, we had a lot of parking bay areas that were basically occupied by vehicles which are not allowed to park. And we looked at an LPWAN solution based on LoRaWAN in this case that actually is able to monitor the parking lots, can tell citizens where actually the taxis currently are and how many are in the taxi rank, but also that can validate whether the right vehicles are actually parking over the parking lot. Another example is basically an impact monitoring example in Croydon. So Croydon is currently really embarking on a 5 million redevelopment. There's a lot of noise, a lot of air pollution. Obviously, it's a concern for the residents and the city itself. And they wanted to have a solution that allows them to monitor the construction work and basically give feedback to the construction company, but also assurances to the residents that the construction work is sustainable. Another example is around like how to manage waste in a council. You've got issues around people coming with commercial vehicles, tipping off commercial waste, but not paying. And it's basically obviously a revenue loss, and it's not legal. So we are developing, or a company is developing a solution to make sure that you recognize the vehicles over time that come, and you are able to identify whether such illegal activity actually takes place. Obviously, there's some other sensors around that monitor how full the bin is, and monitor some of the regulation going on, which kind of helps drive some cost savings. Again, another example in the case of Sutton. Again, you have a company that really looked at the problem of independent travel. So people with learning disabilities, they obviously are anxious if they travel independently around the city, and they want reassurances. And so the company has developed actually a device that basically someone with a learning disability can have. And in case he feels like anxious when he kind of travels across the city, he can press and he gets some and the device connects a carer with him, which is the parent or maybe a carer, and gives him some reassurance through vibration. It's another use case that's currently being trialed there. And again, also looking at people counting in the city and understanding how your visitors flow is also important for cities. And we've got another kind of pilot going on there now. And it's interesting to see, although those pilots are, some of them have like started in September, October timeline. In some cases, like for instance in Croydon, the city is very happy and is now kind of like finalizing like also now commercial contracts with the companies involved in this pilots, and also is recommending already the company to other cities, councils around. So for instance, like Camden Council in London, where the company is now engaging in another pilot. So it kind of shows you the way of how kind of innovators can then start addressing in small scale and experiment with technologies, and the cities can gain confidence and then start scaling it further on. And scaling is basically something what I wanted to talk about next. So obviously, once you've built basically a pilot, once you've gained confidence in this pilot, and you've maybe even rolled it out, you as a solution provider would like to as well have a bigger market, because a city itself is not a market. A city itself doesn't bring you recurring revenue, doesn't allow you to scale beyond the initial investment that you have done. And so there's a lot of thinking that needs to be done how we can actually create environments across cities that are common. And we've basically embarked on a project that is exactly trying to explore that, which is called Synchronicity. It is basically closely connected to an association called Open Agile Smart Cities. Have you heard of Open Agile Smart Cities before? Not many? Okay. So it's basically an association of cities coming together that say, okay, we need to create a common environment, and we need to kind of like try to create common APIs, common information models, and common data platforms that allow us then to benefit from innovations that emerge across other cities and make our own city market more attractive. And this is basically a project, a large-scale European pilot that we've kind of now currently conducting with 8 cities, which are part of this group of Open Agile Smart Cities: Manchester, Helsinki, Eindhoven, Antwerp, Milano, Carouge, Santander, and Porto. And what we're trying to do there is to create a common API across all of the data platforms that are currently in the cities, both northbound and also southbound. And we're trying also to make sure that the data that comes from your sensors that are being deployed in the city follows the same format. So if you deploy, let's say, an air quality monitor from one vendor in one city, the data appears in the same way across all of these cities. So when you later deploy a solution that utilizes this air quality information, you then have to adapt your data, you don't have to map this data, and you don't have to kind of change the information models underneath it. And this has been basically now, so the 3 elements basically are really the APIs for this data management, the shared data models, and something what I call as well an ecosystem transaction management. So when you start sharing data in such a platform, you're actually creating a marketplace. And how do you then gain access rights to these data streams that are available in the city? And this has basically now been accepted by 125 cities, just a couple of weeks ago in Brussels. And it's based on initial open specifications that are being made by different standards bodies. So in future, if you build an application or service that follows these sort of formats and specifications, you are able as well to much better make sure that this sort of service that you build is scalable to other environments. I just wanted to really go to a last point, which I think is really important as well going forward. So a part of this element is looking at, obviously, TTN allows you to kind of have a gateway and share gateways. So you actually share connectivity infrastructure. But what could you actually do if you share not only the network connectivity, but also the data from your sensors? So, so instead of like just you deploying your app and your service, you could also make use of other people deploying their devices and then start building richer services on top of it. And what if you not only can share this information, but actually monetize this information? So basically, the initial investment that you've done in your connectivity infrastructure or in your sensing infrastructure could not only justify the business case that you set for your application, but create additional revenue streams by sharing it with others in a trusted way. And as part of this, we've developed an IoT Data Marketplace in the Synchronicity project. It allows you as a data provider to basically share and expose data. So you can say, I want it to be open for everyone to use, or I want to define a specific data license. So maybe I would want to say, I want this data to be free for research, but for commercial, you have to pay X a month. You define your SLAs. So what sorts of like, how often you want to provide this data, how reliable this data is. And then as a consumer, you can discover this data formats, and you can then basically, if you agree with this license agreement, you can then basically sign these agreements, both digitally. And then what we also do is we track as well the service level agreements over time. This creates basically a layer of trust that allows cities to experiment, and that allows different stakeholders in the city to then experiment and share and build new applications and services in a more sustainable way. And it's currently being piloted in 4 cities. And we're now launching next week another bigger kind of initiative with involving like 10 other cities and 16 different companies building services that run it at least across 2 or 3 cities. This brings me to my end. So I hope I could kind of show you that on one side, LPWAN allows really a more simple experimentation. It offers you more opportunities to build more cheaply and cost-effectively IoT infrastructure in cities, so addressing some of the barriers there. Also that if you engage companies which are like SMEs or like businesses around real challenges, and before procurement, you can build a confidence both on the supply side and the demand side, which hopefully leads basically to more sustainable solutions. And also I've kind of given you a bit of an idea of what sort of emerging APIs and standards are there that make basically smart cities a more scalable market. Thank you.
Alex Gluhak.